A city burns, not in minutes, in seconds. The sky itself becomes fire, then silence, then nothing but salt. Genesis 19 records an event so absolute that its name became synonym for divine wrath. Sodom, a place so consumed that even debate over where it stood required archaeology to settle. The text offers no ambiguity about what happened. Fire and brimstone fell from heaven. Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. Two cities and the entire plain vanished in a single morning. What troubles historians is not whether the account claims destruction occurred. The text is emphatic. What troubles them is how closely the biblical description parallels geological phenomena that leave specific, measurable evidence in the archaeological record. Phenomena that occurred in the Bronze Age Levant. In exactly the region Genesis identifies, this convergence creates intellectual friction. Either the Genesis account preserved accurate details of a catastrophic natural event, or ancient writers somehow described, with precision, geological violence they could not have witnessed. The debate has not resolved. What has changed is the evidence. For centuries, Sodom existed as metaphor, a byword for judgment. The actual cities were considered lost, perhaps mythological. Then, in the 1970s, archaeologists began systematic surveys of the Dead Sea Basin. They found something. Not one destroyed city, but 5, all showing evidence of sudden, violent termination during the Middle Bronze Age, all located in the circular plain the Bible calls Kikar, the circle. The lead candidate emerged from the ruins of Tal el-Hammam, a massive fortified city on the eastern Jordan disk that dominated the region from 3500 to 1700 BCE. At its peak, Tal el-Hammam was the largest continuously occupied Bronze Age site in the southern Levant, 10 times the size of Jericho. Its fortifications were formidable. Thick mud brick walls, massive gateways, sprawling residential quarters. A city that controlled trade routes and agricultural abundance. Then, abruptly, it ended. The termination layer at Tal el-Hammam is unusual. Across the entire excavation, archaeologists found a consistent stratum of destruction dated to approximately 1700 BCE. Above intact floors and beneath later occupation lies a matrix of shattered mud brick, melted pottery, and vitrified material. The temperatures required to produce such melting exceed anything a normal fire could generate. Mud brick melts at around 1400 degrees Celsius. Pottery vitrifies when heated beyond 1200 degrees Celsius. These are not the temperatures of burning wood or oil. These are metallurgical temperatures. What could generate such heat across a city? The biblical text offers specific details. Genesis 19:24 states, "Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven." Verse 28 describes Abraham looking toward the cities and seeing, "The smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace." The narrative specifies the source as heavenly, the material as sulfur and fire, the result as smoke resembling that of a furnace. 3 natural phenomena can produce this combination: a massive volcanic eruption, a seismic event that ignites subsurface hydrocarbons, or an extraterrestrial impact or airburst. The Dead Sea Basin sits atop the Jordan Rift Valley, one of the most seismically active zones on Earth. The rift is a transform fault where the Arabian Plate moves northward relative to the African Plate. This tectonic boundary generates frequent earthquakes, some catastrophic. Historical records document dozens of destructive seismic events in the region. The geology beneath the Dead Sea includes massive deposits of salt, sulfur, bitumen, and natural gas. A major earthquake could rupture these deposits, releasing flammable gases that, if ignited, would create precisely the fire and brimstone scenario described in Genesis. But the evidence at Tal el-Hammam does not align with earthquake damage alone. Earthquake destruction produces collapsed walls, tilted foundations, Structural failure. What archaeologists found was different. The upper portions of mud brick walls had melted. Pottery had been superheated. The destruction layer contained spherules, tiny glassy particles formed when material is instantly melted and cooled. The distribution pattern was consistent across the site, suggesting not ground-based combustion, but thermal radiation from above. This points to a second explanation: an airburst event. An airburst occurs when a meteoroid enters Earth's atmosphere and explodes before reaching the ground. The detonation creates an intense thermal pulse and shock wave that can devastate everything below. The most documented airburst in modern history occurred over Tunguska, Siberia, in 1908. An estimated 12-megaton explosion flattened 2,000 square kilometers of forest. No crater was left because the object disintegrated at altitude. What remained was thermal destruction and a shock wave that circled the globe. Recent analysis of material from Tal el Hammam has identified evidence consistent with such an event. High concentrations of iridium and platinum, elements rare in Earth's crust, but common in meteorites. Quartz grains showing shocked microstructures indicative of extreme pressure. Melted minerals that require instantaneous heating beyond 2,000 degrees Celsius. The distribution pattern of vitrified materials suggests a directional blast, not omnidirectional fire. If an airburst occurred over the Kikar, the sequence would match the biblical description with startling precision. A celestial object streaks across the sky, visible from a distance. It detonates at altitude, producing a blinding flash. The thermal pulse ignites everything combustible across kilometers. A shock wave follows, flattening structures. Sulfur deposits in the ground vaporize, mixing with smoke. The heat is so intense that silica-rich materials melt and fuse. The event lasts seconds. The devastation is absolute. Anyone looking directly at the blast would be instantly blinded or killed. Anyone in the immediate radius would be vaporized. Anyone on the periphery might survive only by moving away immediately. Genesis 19 describes Lot's family fleeing at dawn. The angels urge them, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley." Lot's wife looks back. She becomes a pillar of salt. For centuries, this was read as divine punishment for disobedience, but if an airburst occurred, another reading emerges. The Dead Sea region is saturated with salt. The southern basin contains massive evaporate deposits. An explosion could have ejected molten or vaporized salt into the atmosphere. A person standing in the direction of the blast, exposed to superheated debris and salt fallout, could be encased in mineral deposits. The phrase, pillar of salt, may describe not transformation, but incrustation. Either by divine intervention or geological mechanism, the result described in the text occurs. She does not continue. She stops, permanently. The angel's command to flee toward the hills gains practical coherence. In an airburst scenario, elevation and distance provide survival advantage. Lot requests refuge in the small town of Zoar, described as nearby. The angels grant this, saying, "I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken." Zoar survives. Archaeologically, smaller settlements on the periphery of the Kikar show less severe destruction or continued occupation. If the airburst occurred over the central cities, proximity determined survival. But certainty remains elusive. Not all scholars accept the airburst hypothesis. The evidence, while compelling, is debated. Some argue the vitrified materials could result from intense localized fires fueled by bitumen deposits. Others point out that shocked quartz and iridium anomalies have been found at other sites and later attributed to contamination or misidentification. The dating of the destruction layer aligns approximately with the Middle Bronze Age, but approximately spans decades. Correlating a specific event to a specific biblical account requires caution. What cannot be dismissed is the convergence. The biblical text describes a catastrophic thermal event originating from the sky, localized to a specific geographic region during a historical period when the archaeological record shows exactly such an event occurred in exactly that region. When the angels announce the impending destruction, they state it as judicial action, not natural disaster. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, the Lord tells Abraham in Genesis 18. Abraham negotiates for the righteous within the city. Would God destroy the righteous with the wicked? Would not the judge of all the earth do what is just? This is not language of neutral catastrophe. This is language of accountability. The question persists. If a natural event destroyed the cities, does that diminish divine agency, or does divine judgment operate through natural processes? Ancient Near Eastern theology did not sharply separate natural and supernatural. Storms, earthquakes, eclipses, all were understood as actions of deity. The mechanism did not invalidate the meaning. What mattered was the timing, the target, and the consequence. Abraham bargains God down from 50 righteous to 10. The implication is clear. Even 10 righteous people would have spared the cities. The angels find only Lot. The cities burn. The theological claim is not merely that destruction happened, but that it happened because accumulated sin reached a threshold where continuance was untenable. The event was not random. It was response. Whether one accepts this framework depends not on archaeology, but on theological presuppositions. Science can determine that a high-temperature event occurred. It cannot determine intent. That distinction must be maintained. What archaeology does affirm is that the Genesis account contains historically plausible details. The geography is accurate. The Kikar is a real place. The cities existed. Their sudden destruction during the Bronze Age is documented. The description of thermal devastation matches physical evidence. The account preserves information consistent with eyewitness testimony, not fabricated myth, but uncertainty remains about mechanism. If an airburst destroyed the cities, was the meteor's arrival coincidence or providence? If seismic activity ignited natural gas deposits, was the earthquake's timing chance or judgment? These questions cannot be resolved empirically. They require decisions about the nature of causation itself. The text does not waver. Genesis presents the event as deliberate divine action. Modern readers must decide whether to interpret that claim literally, metaphorically, or as ancient interpretation of natural disaster. Each choice carries implications. What is undeniable is the event's impact on collective memory. Sodom became shorthand for divine judgment. Prophets invoked it. Jesus referenced it. Peter and Jude cited it as example. The destruction was not forgotten. It was memorialized, theologized, weaponized. A city that vanished became more influential than most that endured. And this raises a deeper question. If Sodom's destruction was purely natural, why did it embed so deeply in religious consciousness? Natural disasters were common in the ancient world. Earthquakes leveled cities. Floods drowned populations. Volcanic eruptions buried settlements. Most faded from memory. Sodom did not. Something about this event gripped the ancient imagination and refused to release it. Perhaps it was the totality. The text emphasizes that nothing survived. The cities were overthrown, the valley destroyed, all inhabitants perished. Genesis 19:25 states, "He overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground." Absolute destruction is rare. Even catastrophic events usually leave survivors, remnants, traces of continuity. Sodom left none. The archaeological record confirms this. After 1700 BCE, Tall El Hammam was abandoned for centuries. The depopulation of the region was severe and prolonged. Whatever happened did not just destroy cities, it erased a civilization. Perhaps it was the moral framing. Sodom was not destroyed arbitrarily. The narrative links destruction to behavior. Wickedness invited judgment. The message was clear and transmissible. Communities that tolerate injustice, violence, and cruelty will not endure. This is a universal principle, testified to by the ruins of empires. Whether one attributes it to divine intervention or social entropy, the pattern holds. Societies that degrade collapse. Or perhaps it was the warning. Lot's escape, offered despite his compromised righteousness, demonstrated that judgment allows exemption. Mercy operates even within wrath. Abraham's intercession is honored even when it fails. The angels delay destruction to ensure Lot's family reaches safety. The text insists that God does not delight in the death of the wicked. Destruction is last resort, not first impulse. These theological layers complicate scientific analysis. Data can tell us what happened. It struggles to tell us why it mattered. And Sodom mattered. Its memory endured not because fire fell from heaven, but because people believed fire fell for a reason. Today, the ruins of Tall El Hammam lie exposed under the Jordanian sun. Excavations continue. Each season yields more artifacts, more data, more questions. The vitrified pottery is catalogued. The melted brick is photographed. The carbon dates are refined. Science does what science does. It describes, it measures, it proposes explanations. But standing in those ruins, one confronts something beyond measurement. The silence of a place that once thrived and now does not. The absence where life was. The stubborn fact that violence, whether cosmic or divine, found this place and erased it. The Bible offers an explanation. Modern science offers another. Perhaps both are partially correct. Perhaps the categories themselves are inadequate. The ancient world did not distinguish between natural and supernatural the way modernity does. Thunder was both atmospheric electricity and the voice of God. Plague was both pathogen and divine judgment. The categories were not confused. They were unified. We have gained precision. We have lost coherence. We can explain how mud brick melts. We cannot explain why this city, in this moment, met this fate. Probability offers unsatisfying answers. Chance feels insufficient for events that shape history. Yet we must resist the temptation to fabricate certainty. The evidence suggests a high-temperature, catastrophic event consistent with either airburst or seismic ignition of hydrocarbons. The timing aligns with the Middle Bronze Age. The location matches the biblical description. These are data points, not conclusions. The leap from data to theological interpretation is interpretive, not empirical. What remains is a text that refuses to be dismissed and evidence that refuses to be ignored. Sodom was real. Its destruction was real. Whether that destruction was judgment depends on questions archaeology cannot answer. What motivated Abraham's negotiation? What did the angels represent? Was Lot's rescue coincidence or intervention? These are questions of meaning, not mechanism. The story endures because it addresses something beyond historical curiosity. It confronts human beings with the possibility that actions have consequences, not merely social or psychological, but cosmic, that the universe is not indifferent, that there exists accountability woven into the structure of reality itself. Whether that accountability is impersonal moral law or personal divine will is the question every generation must answer for itself. Sodom does not provide comfortable answers. It provides an uncomfortable question. Can a society persist when it abandons justice? Can individuals survive when their community does not? The rubble suggests the answer is no, but rubble does not preach. It simply testifies. Once there was something here, now there is not. The warning embedded in the text is not about specific sins, though those are catalogued. The warning is about trajectories. Societies move toward flourishing or collapse. The movement is not always visible. Right up until destruction, Sodom functioned. It had walls, gates, markets, homes. It looked permanent. It was not. Permanence is illusion. What endures is what aligns with reality. What conflicts with reality eventually meets correction. Sometimes that correction is gradual. Sometimes it arrives from the sky. We prefer gradual. We prefer warnings, time to adjust, opportunities for reform. Sodom received warnings. Angels arrived. Lot was urged to gather his family. His sons-in-law thought he was joking. They did not believe destruction was imminent. Normalcy bias is powerful. Tomorrow will resemble today. The city that has stood for centuries will stand tomorrow, until it does not. The psychological relevance of Sodom is not about ancient history. It is about the difficulty of perceiving existential threat when daily life proceeds normally. The cities were destroyed at dawn. People were sleeping or beginning their day. Routine continued until routine ended. There was no gradual transition, no time to prepare once the event began. There was only before and after was unrecognizable. This is what makes the account so viscerally disturbing. It depicts radical discontinuity. One moment, civilization. The next, ash. No middle ground, no gradual decline, instant transition from existence to non-existence. This defies human experience. We expect change to be slow enough to track, to adjust to. Sodom denies this expectation. Whether such events are common or rare depends on scale. Sudden catastrophe is rare for cities, common for individuals. Death often arrives without warning. Accident, violence, aneurysm. The mechanisms vary, but the result is the same. Continuity ends. For those who remain, the question is always the same. Why now? Why here? Why them? The biblical text does not evade these questions. It answers them theologically. Sin accumulated. Judgment arrived. The timing was not arbitrary. The target was not random. This is presented as explanation, not cruel mystery. Whether one accepts it as adequate depends on one's understanding of divine justice. Modern sensibilities often recoil from the Sodom narrative. The destruction is total. Children presumably died. Animals perished. The text shows no concern for collateral damage. This troubles readers who hold to frameworks where divine action must be defensible by human ethical standards. If God is love, how can God destroy cities? The biblical answer is that love and justice are not opposed. A God who tolerates injustice indefinitely is not good, but passive. A God who allows evil to perpetuate unchallenged is complicit. Judgment is not the opposite of love. Judgment is love refusing to abandon justice. This is the theological claim. One need not accept it, but one should understand it before dismissing it. The tension cannot be resolved by appealing to science. Science describes what happened, not whether it should have happened. That is the domain of ethics and theology. What we can say is that if the biblical account is accurate, something happened in the Dead Sea Basin during the Middle Bronze Age that destroyed multiple cities with such violence that the memory became foundational to Western moral consciousness. That memory warns us still, not primarily about sexual sin, though that is present in the text, not primarily about hospitality, though that matters. The warning is simpler and more comprehensive. Societies that systematically violate human dignity will not endure. The mechanism of collapse varies. Sometimes it is internal decay, sometimes it is external conquest. Sometimes, rarely, it is catastrophic natural disaster. But the pattern holds. What is built on injustice eventually falls. Whether one reads this as divine judgment or inevitable consequence, the outcome is the same. Sodom fell. Its name became synonym for destruction. The ruins remain, silent testimony to the fragility of human achievement and the permanence of moral law. And we, standing in the present, must ask what Sodom asks every generation. What are we building? On what foundation? And what will remain when the fire comes? The ashes of Sodom still whisper warnings. The convergence of ancient text and modern evidence demands attention, not resolution. Attention. Explore these intersections of faith, history, and science with the Convergent Script. Subscribe to continue the investigation. And in the comments, share your response to the question Sodom will not release. Can judgment arrive so suddenly that normalcy offers no protection?